welcome to a new episode of the Game Informer Show. I'm your host, Ben Hanson, joined by Kyle Hilliard.
Hey, I'm here.
We got Jeff Marchiafava.
Hey.
Or Jeff'em, as we confusingly call him. And then one Matt Miller.
Hi, Ben.
Hi. Do you not want to be here, Miller?
I think it's safe to say that the thing that I'm here to talk about, I'm not as excited about as some of the games that we've covered.
Miller's here to talk about Uncharted 4, and he has some scathing opinions.
It's a lie. I love Uncharted 4. Another game that was released recently is the one I'm not super enthusiastic about.
So here's what we have on this show. We're going to talk a little bit about Battleborn, bring back the old favorite Battleborn versus Overwatch debate, which is very popular on this
Tech's
podcast.
not here, so we can say whatever we want.
Oh, it's going to be so satisfying.
Exactly the same game.
That's right. We're going to talk a little bit about Odds and Ends, the new Pokemon game, which has got a trailer, and some other mysterious Game Freak developed games that Kyle's been playing. Uncharted 4 a little bit. The big news about Disney getting out of game publishing.
That's
internally,
big.
At least. Yeah, it's
and weird.
It's very
strange. Surprising. Yeah.
We'll get into all that and a couple other games here and there. But then at the end of the show, we have an interview that I recorded in early February and have been sitting on it. It is with the directors of the Angry Birds movie.
Wow.
Which is 2 film interviews in a row. So I apologize if you're not interested in film adaptations of games. It's just a weird coincidence that they're back to back here. But it's a good chat. So the directors, they're co-directors, they have a crazy pedigree. Like one of them was a storyboard artist that worked on like Spider-Man 2 and Iron Giant, and the other, that guy's name is Fergal Reilly, by the way, and the other's name is Kaytis, and he was at Disney from Pocahontas as an animator all the way up through Wreck-It Ralph.
Wow.
He was a very high up animator, like on Frozen, just crazy Disney pedigree, and so he also hosted the Animation Podcast, which is like long form interviews with animators, which is absolutely amazing. So we have him on the show. I rave about his podcast for about 60% of that interview, but I recommend you check it out. It's an interesting angle, just talking about how you turn the concept of Angry Birds into a movie, and the fact that Rovio, the game company, has poured so much money into this thing. It is the largest Finnish film production ever. And it's the Angry Birds movie.
That comes out next week, I think. Right?
I think
it's not,
so.
It's not this week, but I think it's next week.
Yeah,
I think it's easy for us to forget how huge Angry Birds is, just as a media property.
Is or was?
Well, I don't know. I mean, this might help determine the answer to that question.
Yeah, that's
right?
a good point.
It maybe hasn't been as big, but if they've somehow managed to break that barrier that so few people have been able to make a kid-targeted game movie work out of that grew up out of like video games.
You mean more successful than the Ratchet and Clank movie?
More successful even than that,
Which Kyle saw in theaters.
Yeah.
and you
Don't
really
need to see
loved.
that.
Yeah.
We've talked about it enough on this podcast, but
Hey,
I think reviews are coming in for Angry Birds movie, and people seem to be saying this is better than I thought it was going to be, and that it's actually pretty funny.
Cool.
So I'm curious to see what the big reaction is when that actually is released. But we should talk about games.
Okay.
So releasing this week, we're not really going to talk about it, but Stellaris came out on Steam. It's a 4X game from Paradox. It seems like it's taking that 4X community by storm. People are
Can you
absolutely in
name
love
the
with
4Xs right now?
Yes, I can. We got,
Mega Man.
let's see.
Man.
There's XXX and then Xseed, I think. No, okay, we got Expand, Explore,
Okay.
Expose.
Expose, and
Sponge.
Maybe?
X State of the Union. I don't know. But anyways.
We did it.
There are 4 of them.
Yeah, so people are really in love with Stellaris. So if you're looking for a new 4X game, maybe check that out. But next week, we're going to have Reeves on to talk all about it, because it's tough after a day to cover a 4X game. Also, Civilization 6 was announced yesterday. But we don't need to cover that, because we don't know much about it. But we should talk about something that we do know a lot about. Specifically, we've been holding you back, Miller. You've been incubating your thoughts on this game called Battleborn from Gearbox.
Yeah.
You are the winter soldier that's been awakened, and now you're going to tell us all about Gearbox's Battleborn with the most informed opinion you can possibly muster.
All right. Well, you may have noticed that we haven't posted our review yet for Battleborn.
That's true. What's going on with that?
Well, one of the things that I will say for Battleborn is that it is a very big and very complex game. There's a lot going on there. A lot of characters.
Big. That's interesting.
It is.
People were kind of shocked because when they're going in expecting something more of the Borderlands format, and then they see this. Where is that content? Where is it hiding?
I think a lot of that content is like the learning curve of learning the different characters and how they play, how to interact with the different modes. I think there is a lot of content there. And before I dive into too much of
You can say
calling out the things that I don't like about this game, of which there are a multitude, I will say that for somebody who likes the concept of Battleborn and likes the visual style of it, there's a lot to dig into here. And the characters themselves are kind of fun.
Totally.
They're distinct one from another. Learning their different power sets is interesting. And that's my favorite thing about the game.
Great. Okay, moving on to Overwatch then. I think.
But there's a big follow up on that. There's a big but.
Yep.
I think almost all the aspects of like the gameplay structure and like whether you're talking about the moment to moment gameplay to the broader decisions about how they've structured their campaign, just don't work for me.
For you personally, or do you think in general?
Well, I can't speak for anybody else. I know that there's people out there who are liking Battleborn, and we've talked before on this podcast about the idea that like, if you like a game and we don't like it, way to go, man. Like, we love it when people like games. People sometimes write us in after we have a negative review on a game, and ultimately, like, everybody's had a game they don't like, right? And sometimes it's a game that other people do. And that's all that I and anybody else at Game Informer can offer is hopefully what is a moderately educated opinion about a game based on spending a lot of time with it and really exploring it as fully as we can.
On that note, Battleborn, I think it's sitting at very positive for the Steam reviews, however much credit you give to that. So there is a passionate community of people that are, hey, thumbs up. This is cool.
There absolutely is. And so I'm not trying to dismiss those people. I'm not telling them they're wrong. I'm just saying this game doesn't work for me for various reasons. The campaign has these like 8 missions that you go through, and they're all quite lengthy. They don't have any checkpoints, and they're mostly built around defend objectives and escort objectives. 2 things that I think we would all agree have not traditionally been high points in objective-based gameplay.
No.
And yet here it's the main focus of the storytelling campaign.
They repeatedly come up. Yeah.
Most of the missions are some variety of defend this spot or escort these things to this place. And if you fail any one of those objectives, which you will, I think, frequently, it's not like you go back to a checkpoint. The mission ends, and you go back and you have to start the mission over.
This seems mind-boggling.
So you can get like an hour into a lengthy mission.
They're that big?
Yes.
They take a long time, yeah.
And you then fail on like the last big defend objective of that mission. It's back to the drawing board.
That's mind-boggling design in 2016.
It seems weird to me as well. I also haven't found any way to do like drop-in play during those missions, and so like you're kind of and I'm still looking into it. Like I said, I haven't posted my review yet, but there doesn't appear to be a way for me to bring people in partway through a mission. So once I'm in there, like for one, I can't quit out. If I like want to go eat dinner or something like that and I'm playing with friends, there's no checkpoints that are going to save me partway along the way and let me come back. I either do the mission or I don't, and it's really long. And even once I start, like let's say Jeff logs on and he wants to play with me, he can't, as near as I can tell. That said, I mean, they try to have these kind of pretty challenging objectives that you're going through that you really have to focus and like make good decisions about what defenses and turrets you set up to block the enemy attackers. And there's the potential for that to be interesting, except the gameplay itself isn't very good. Like the actual moment-to-moment gameplay. The shooting is just not up to the standards that we've come to expect in other shooting games in the last couple of years. Doesn't have the precision, doesn't have the interesting gunplay, the variety in the feeling of the weapons. Everything feels kind of loose. That's when you're doing range stuff, and the melee stuff is a disaster. I mean,
really,
it's just not good. I play a lot of these melee characters, and I just don't understand what's going on the screen because it's so raucously busy visually that I feel like all I'm doing is sort of running up to enemies and holding down the melee attack button and standing there for a certain amount of time. Maybe I'm moving back and forth a little bit to dodge their attacks, But I mean, to be fair, first-person melee has always been a challenging thing to implement well.
Yeah.
But I don't know that that's an excuse.
So it's
right?
Wrath. I remember the sword guy. Who are there a lot of melee characters?
Yeah,
Is
there's
it
a lot
part
of
the
melee
game?
characters, and they just none of them really work for me. Some of them are powerful. Some of them are like in the balance game are characters that you might choose. I just don't think that they're engaging to play with, even if they do a lot of damage or whatever.
I want to focus on you talking about the feel of the game, because I feel like that's been a criticism that's been kind of boiling up amongst the community playing this, is it feels kind of light and hollow and not impactful and not enough weight. Is that the takeaway?
That's certainly the experience that I've had with it.
Huh.
There's this feeling like when you attack enemies, there's not a other than seeing their health bar tick down, there's not the sense that you're actually damaging them.
You got numbers flying out, right?
You do. You have numbers flying up, but there's some very hard to define quality that you have in good shooters and good first-person games that give you a sense to the connection, the sort of like visceral sense of being involved in, I'm doing damage to this thing, I'm having damage done to me, that in this game just doesn't feel like it's there.
Do you think it's sound design?
Well, I also don't love the sound design in this game.
Okay, but you think that's disconnected?
I think it's sound and animation.
I do.
Okay.
I think it's the way all of these things fit together. I mean, the last couple of weeks. I know this week we're going to talk a little bit about it, and last week you guys talked about Uncharted.
Yeah.
Like that's a game that has integrated all its systems in a way that like serves the narrative and does something really interesting. This is almost the opposite of that in my mind. Like Battleborn, the various systems just don't seem connected to one another and in service of anything in particular. And so the sound design, like first of all, the dialogue is not funny. It does not work for me.
I like the Miller is like at the end of last year. You also reviewed Xenoblade Chronicles X, and I think you're on this podcast talking about that is not funny. I like the idea of like you constantly reviewing the games that are really trying for jokes that just don't land.
It's a specialty.
Yeah, failed jokes.
I
Miller.
think there's lots of video games that are really funny.
Name one. Name the funniest video game ever made, Miller.
Oh God,
Here we go on the spot.
I don't know what is the funniest video game ever made.
It begins with a P.
Miller.
What?
It's Jackbox Party Pack.
Jackbox Party Pack is a really funny game.
Correct.
No, it's Portal.
Portal's a really funny game. I think Borderlands can be a really funny game, although it's not the funniest game of all time. I think Gearbox's previous work on Borderlands manages somehow to nail that mix of, like, it is sort of juvenile and silly, and yet it works. Like, there's something about it that, like, hits home.
I think it clearly has found an audience. I mean, I think if you go back, I don't want to have two rose-colored glasses here, but you go back and even play Borderlands 2, which I think is a step up writing-wise from Borderlands 1. I mean, there's a lot of duds in there too. I don't want to be the hater here,
but I think that's part of it is that, you know, Battleborn is such a distilled. They're like trying to pack so much into these, 8 missions that it's just like constantly in your face. Whereas with Borderlands, it's a game that you play for 60 hours, and if a bunch of jokes don't land, they you just kind of forget them and remember.
But some of them do, like the robot stuff in Borderlands, like with Claptrap or whatever, totally like works. It's funny, even
Joe
though it's
would call
goofy.
us idiots, but yeah.
Well, even like on that point, Fava is talking about the structure of Borderlands. I think it might work better comedically as well, just because you're running around this kind of town or this hub area and you're interacting with those characters. Whereas everything that I've played from Battleborn, it's just an obnoxious radio play over the top of these missions. Is that?
I think that's fair. There's the dilemma that, like, one of the things that I said I liked about the game, which is that it has a lot of characters, also hurts it because they're forced to try to somehow justify each one of those different characters as they go through. So there's very little in the way of like main characters, and there's this slowly expanding roster of a couple dozen characters that they're each of which they're trying to like. Oh, you like this guy because he's the funny old guy, but he's also kind of evil, and like that's about it. Like what else do I know about this guy? I don't know. Like the characters don't have enough space to grow into their own like fully fleshed out versions, whether they're funny or not.
And also they repeat the jokes just constantly.
Yes.
Like even, I played with you for a couple hours, and like within like the first 20 minutes, my character is repeating like the same jokes again and again. It doesn't matter how funny a joke is, if you keep on telling it that often, it just becomes grating.
I can hear the audience out there, a certain segment saying, you're comparing this game to Uncharted 4. You're talking about how the story and the characters don't work out. I'm looking for a fun game for multiplayer. Is the like PvP stuff? Is that where the heart is?
I think the PvP stuff is better than the PvE stuff.
Okay.
They've used a structure that is a pre-existing structure in a lot of ways by basing it on MOBAs. And whether you like MOBAs or not, there is something that is appealing about that structure. There's a reason so many millions of people play these
They
games.
ain't wrong, yeah.
Right? Like, it's because there's the conceit works of having these different lanes that you're moving down, and you're like leveling up your character in one brief span of time all the way through this like track of a leveling tree. Like having different characters who each have very distinct abilities, and you're kind of trying to see how they balance one against another. All of that stuff is a game design concept that has been proven to work, and to a certain degree it does work here. But for me, when the actual moment-to-moment gameplay, which carries over between the campaign stuff and the multiplayer, when that's just not good, well, what else? What am I supposed to be really excited about here? Even if you've cribbed a really smart structure of borrowing from MOBAs to do some interesting stuff with your PvP, if the melee always feels like I'm running up to some guy and I can't really see what's happening on screen, I'm just kind of holding down a button, or the shooting feels really loose and doesn't feel connected to the enemies that I'm targeting, whether they are real people on the other side or AI, at some point it's just not engaging. It's not a fun experience.
That's I think what I'm trying to figure out with the reaction towards Battleborn is just trying to get a read on how much of it you think is poor design or just not pieced together as well as you would want, versus like they made a solid thing that's a little bit strange, but it's solid, but ultimately it's just not fun to play. Does that make sense as reviewers? I don't review games. Is that a weird distinction to make?
At the end of the day, when I'm playing a game for review, I'm thinking like, am I engaged with what I'm doing? Is this fun? Is this like an enjoyable experience? So I want to keep playing. I don't get those sensations when I'm playing Battleborn. And when it comes right down to it, any other sort of sophistry aside about review philosophy and all that kind of stuff, that's really important, right? My opinion of this game is formed by like, what's my experience when I'm playing this game? And when the sound design doesn't work, the animation feels choppy to me, the art design is interesting, but ultimately results in experiences that are really visually hard to like understand,
digest.
Do you know what I mean, Jeff?
Yeah.
Like, there's something about like just all of those colors and the flashes and the sort of animation style that they've done that just makes it hard to interpret what's happening.
Everything
clearly.
feels disparate visually.
Yes.
You know, like nothing seems to quite line up, which I guess maybe you could say that that's what they're going for with different planets and aliens.
Yeah, they're all
together,
aliens
but,
converging on the same spot.
It's not aesthetically pleasing.
I do not find it aesthetically pleasing. I don't find the characters funny. I don't think the story's good. I don't like the structure of the campaign and having to replay missions because it's been balanced in such a way that like some objectives are super easy and I just breeze right through them, and then I get to this one thing that, whether I'm playing in public matches or not, or I'm playing with friends, it just like we always fail it. And so we have to redo an hour of play that wasn't challenging just to get to that point.
That completely killed my enthusiasm for any of the, co-ops, PvE stuff. I mean, we banged our head against one mission. I did the same thing with TAC earlier, and it's not that, we were having such a hard time that we were dying all the time. It's like, hold this place for 15 minutes, and then, these grenade lobbing characters come in somewhere, amidst all the chaos that's going on, and before you know it, they bring down the thing that you're trying to defend, and you're standing right in front of the thing defending it, and you're burning through all your abilities. You have all the turrets that you can build up all around you, and it's still being destroyed right in front of your eyes, and you can't really do anything about it.
And I think even then, there's an argument to be made for the idea that, like, okay, well, a lot of games have challenging objectives, and that's what makes them fun. But I would challenge the assertion that it's fun to have that happen an hour into a mission that was otherwise totally straightforward and kind of boring, and then get to this one space that for some reason has been balanced to be 10 times harder than everything else in the mission, and then have that moment be the time that you're okay. Well, last time we tried to set up these turrets here, and we had 2 guys holding at the defense zone and 2 other guys roaming around. Well, that didn't work. All right, well, we failed, so it kicked us back to the beginning of the mission, and we have to get all the way back to that point. By the way, just for your reference, if you play publicly, you can't choose which story missions you play. You select a playlist for all story missions, and it matches you in, and you get to express a preference between 3 different missions.
Like voting for a map type of thing?
Yes.
Okay.
So you can't even like choose like, oh, well, last time I did this public match, we failed. Mm-hmm. There's no retry with your group. It breaks up the public group, and you have to go back in, and maybe you get a chance to play that mission again, and maybe you don't. It's just... like, why would you do that? I just don't... There's so many design decisions here that I don't understand.
Yeah.
And the solution to the one mission that me and Miller and I think it was Burtz or someone else who was playing with us, the solution was that Miller just had to pick a different character, who had like larger area of effect attacks.
Okay.
And so like we banged our head against it trying to figure out, what we could do tactically playing together as a team. And the answer was, well, we just needed a different character to like, who had better area of attack. Of effect.
Isn't that part of the charm of the game, though, is learning the characters and trying to strategize different environments, what would work better?
I do think that a great deal of the charm of the game is learning the different characters. And as I said at the beginning, that's the best part of this game in my mind.
Penguins in a mech suit, cool.
Yeah, I think they're cute. They're not always funny. Which is a problem because they're going for funny with all of them, and a lot of them are actively non-funny, and so I don't want to play them because I literally don't want to hear their quips again and again and again.
I remember some of those quips being funny on the cover story trip. I remember the one that stands out is somebody was yelling at Thorn, who's kind of the elf lady with the bow, and one of the quips was that she smells like camping. It's not a bad little joke. Look, it's not a laugh out loud moment, but it's like, all right, that's kind of a cute little insult.
Well, now, like, that joke was funny when you guys were on it, but now you guys have probably heard it dozens of times over the course of being frustrated
I've not heard that particular joke. But yes, there are many jokes in that vein that you hear repeatedly, that you hear your guys shout out again and again the same thing.
Right.
So anyway, to get back to it, I do think the meat of the game for many people will be the PvP experience. Mm-hmm. I think if you find a character that you really like and that you can engage with, there's some interesting sort of progression concepts behind like, okay, I'm going to play this character, I'm going to get some more skins, I'm going to get some more mutations for how they like can level up over time. That can be kind of fun. But a lot of the core like gameplay experience falls flat for me, and when it comes right down to it, it's if that's true, I can't recommend it. Well, I mean, what do you want, right? Like,
so Jeff, in a hypothetical scenario where you had a group of dearest best friends going back 7 years or more, and they all reached out to you and said, "Dude, we're really excited about Battleborn. Let's play Battleborn co-op." Would you play it with them? Is there any universe where you'd play this game moving into the future? I guess is the core of the question.
Yeah, I mean, sure. In that scenario, I would probably tell them there are better co-op games that we could play together. But I think it speaks to the feeling of in the office of how this game is, that Miller really had to twist arms to get people to play with him all week long. And usually, I mean, and again, not to say that Overwatch and Battleborn are the same game, but I think most of us last weekend or whatever, we went home and we couldn't wait to play more Overwatch.
Right. If we're not going to get a better segue than that. Battleborn might be for some. Miller says thumbs down.
That's true.
Is that a good takeaway? Okay, let's get to Overwatch, which, by the way, the comparison we had weeks ago on the podcast, holy Lord, do people hate that comparison. I should have made it more clear. I was playing a little bit of devil's advocate to get a reaction and an explanation out of Dan Tech. I do not think that these are literally the exact same game.
Yeah.
I do think they're closer than Dan Tech would care to admit, and that clearly the reaction towards both of them, everybody's lumping them together. People see hero shooters, and on a extremely surface level, they say those are the same games.
I mean, Division and Destiny are not the same games, but you certainly have to recognize that they have some shared heritage.
And I rejected Dan Tech's notion of there's no relation, they're completely different. It's like, wow, completely. Okay, they're different. Anyways, Jeffem, Overwatch, it seems like of all the people that got their hands on with Overwatch in the latest round of the open beta, especially because it was on consoles, you might have been the most enthusiastic of the new wave coming in?
I guess so.
You're like the coolest and best, I think is what I'm trying to say.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Well, we say that a lot in the office.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So what attracted you to this game? And what was your experience with Overwatch before the latest round of open beta?
This was the first time I actually played it. I think I sat on a test chamber with Dan at some
But
point.
you just looked at your phone most of the time.
Yeah, we really phone it in for those,
You.
literally or whatever. Yeah,
Do you write for Battleborn?
I did. Yeah, I mean, it's weird to kind of be the ambassador for this game when everyone in the office has been playing it and having a fun time. But this was definitely, I heard lots of good things about it. You know, I hadn't really followed the news about it, but when they say, hey, try it for the weekend for free, you know, I jumped in and I was very impressed with my experience with it.
I think there's a lot of people that are in your camp where maybe they're more console focused than PC and they hear some good PC buzz, but I mean, PC specific games, they don't exactly do gangbusters on our site traffic wise. So it's like there's plenty of people that I think with this opening, they finally get their hands on. It's like, yeah, I guess I've heard good things tangentially from the PC crowd. What is this all about? Am I going to get into this? So I'm curious though, what struck you specifically?
A lot of the core gameplay mechanics that we were just kind of complaining about are just, I mean, and I guess you should expect it from Blizzard, you know, but they just kind of how they figured out. I think this is the smoothest playing first-person shooter on a console that I've had. It's
That's high praise.
first
That is
time
crazy.
where like I've never thought twice about, you know, controlling it and how smooth it is and how easy it is to aim at people in, you know, in the console space for a shooter. And the nice thing about it is it lets you just focus on, you know, the 4 different abilities that every single character
It's
has.
so simple. I think that's the real charm behind
You
Overwatch.
didn't have to adjust to not pulling the left trigger and not
That's
having
the
sprint
thing. I think a lot
anymore.
of people are like, they go into it and they say, oh my God, no iron sights, no
Yeah,
sprinting
and-
unless you're playing.
It was an adjustment. It wasn't
Yeah.
like a knock against the game, but I did have like maybe a match or two where I was like, oh wait, I don't need to pull the trigger.
And
What am I doing?
that was the first thing that I noticed, that, you know, there's no iron sights. I thought, like, God, what the hell kind of game doesn't have iron sights nowadays? And you're right. After like the first match, it's like, oh, okay. You know, it's no problem whatsoever. You can aim at someone way across the map, and you don't do the thing where you kind of go back and forth trying to figure it out. And it just, every character felt good.
Yeah. I mean, Miller, what have you played so far?
Well, I think Blizzard, what you're describing in the microcosm that is Overwatch is what is Blizzard as a developer in its entire catalog,
Yeah.
what they do.
yeah,
They
absolutely.
take existing ideas, in this case, like competitive first-person shooting, but they've done it with RTS, they've done it with MMOs, they've done it with collectible card games, they've done it with action RPGs.
Those
like,
lost Greek soldiers, they capitalized on that idea and made Lost Vikings, really perfected the formula.
I think at any point in the last decade plus, you could say that Blizzard's specialty hasn't been on like fundamental innovation of new ideas. It's taking existing ideas and making them really good and really accessible, really simple, but with depth, right? Like
Right.
that's the big challenge, right, with game development, is to make something that you can have a new player come in. I mean, the tutorial for Overwatch is really simple. It's funny how like it's a level of, you've never seen a first-person shooter before, right? Like, this is how you move. You need to pull the trigger to shoot at these things. It's stuff like that, right?
It just feels like,
and
yeah.
and so it's welcoming. It's in that might seem weird for a lot of us who are longtime gamers. But if you take a step back from it, you realize that what they're doing there is they're inviting everybody to the table.
Absolutely.
Right? And they're doing it in such a way that gets everybody on board, whether they've been playing first-person shooters for 20 years or they've never done it before, and then it drops them into a game experience that at first glance and first experience is totally accessible. Right?
They're just such masters at understanding game design and just seeing, they have like, I don't know, Superman vision, X-ray vision, where they can just look at this genre and focus in on what are the key ingredients, how can we trim everything else away and boil down on that. There's actually a great talk about designing the tutorial for Hearthstone that the lead designer gave. It must have been at GDC, but it's available publicly. And in that, they even talked about how important the tutorial was from Plants vs. Zombies for inspiration. Like the masters of like simple tutorials and getting you in. And Overwatch feels, as strange as it is, like in that vein of simplicity.
So that was my. I haven't played as much, I think, as Jeff has of Overwatch, but that was the big takeaway for me, is that I found I could go in and they have this broad selection of really interesting characters with interesting powers, fun art designs to them. Any one of them I could pick up, and within a matter of 2 minutes, I knew what I was doing with that character. I got the sort of archetype they were shooting for with them, and I was off to the races to like have a fun match. And that is very, very hard to do. To have it be that simple and invisible and have you just sort of fall into it, to make it like that is what's hard about game design.
And I've heard some friends jump into Overwatch and they're kind of overwhelmed by the amount of characters. And I think that's a common reaction. I think there's 21, somewhere around there.
I think so, yeah.
Okay, but just seeing that many, just being like, I can't learn this. This is getting MOBA-esque for the number of characters. But it really does not take long to just cycle through those characters and then understand everybody's range of abilities. Maybe some supers and ultimates you won't quite understand, but I'm curious what characters you gravitated towards.
And along those lines, like one of the first things I did was jump in the weekly brawl thing, which is like, we're going to give you a totally random character. Every time you die, you come back as a random character. And I did that for like 2 matches or whatever, and I spent a lot of time looking at the little guy, and I was like, all right, this is stupid. Like I shouldn't be jumping into totally random characters. But by the end of the weekend, like I knew every single one of those characters, and it was super easy to just remember, like, oh yeah, okay, this is fair. Like
You're drawing sketches of them, putting them up on your wall.
And the other thing I wanted to say about character design is, it didn't take me long to gravitate towards a couple characters, like Soldier 76 and Bastion, who everyone hates, and those kind of things. And after a while, I consciously forced myself to stop picking the ones that I wanted to and pick the ones that I thought were lame. And it turned out like I loved them just as much. And I ended up with a couple like new total favorites. Junkrat was one of them where I was like, this guy looks stupid. And then I started playing with him and it was like, oh, okay. Like all these abilities are awesome. They all work together so well. And if you're playing defense, like this is a perfect character for it.
And then Zarya was another one that you gravitated towards eventually?
And that was another one that I was like, oh, I can give myself a shield and I can give another person a shield. And then, you play a couple times and you just have a totally killer match, and you figure out how to use all of those abilities throughout it. And it's like, oh, this character is totally awesome.
Absolutely. So, I think my top three, Junkrat, who it's a weird comparison. I was talking to you guys earlier about it, but he reminds me so much of what I loved about playing as Snake in Smash Brothers Brawl. Because literally, like, Junkrat's 2 moves is there's like a landmine that you can detonate and then just a trap that people get caught in automatically, which is like the exact same moveset as Snake from Brawl, where you just lay a trap, keep your eye kind of on it, but you can still engage in other action and then detonate it or just watch somebody get ensnared in it. And it's so much fun to have. Kind of play that long game.
To kind of pause you for a second on your list, like I think Smash Brothers is actually not a bad comparison because it's like a number of disparate, very recognizable characters who are all have a distinct look about them, but they all have like a limited set of moves that all kind of function similarly.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
so
a
it's
good
easy
point.
to jump around, like it's like we always laugh at Jeff Corrick always picks random in Super Smash Brothers, and he's always like one of the better players in the office because they all kind of feel a little like they feel similar enough that you can jump around pretty easily.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Zenyatta was another one that I did not think I would be into at all. The support character. Zenyatta's hand animations look a lot like Miko from Battleborn, but we don't need to draw that comparison anymore. But another one, just playing support. It's like even Cork has such a good time with his Angel. What is the
Mercy?
Thank you. Just backing people up. Not a lot of people do it necessarily or gravitate towards it, but it's still so much fun with Zenyatta to like have this ability that you can lock on an enemy and then they'll just take more damage, and feeling like if I'm not great at shooting, that I can still really help out my team that way is great. And then Pharah, I love when I just feel like launching missiles and flying around.
Did you guys play a lot of Team Fortress 2?
Or a little bit, not much.
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely different, but the comparison is,
it is in that vein.
Very much so.
Okay.
Actually, on that note, I'm pulling from emails early, but Josh Osborne wrote in and says, "Hey, GI crew, hope things are going well for all of you." Thank you, Josh. In a time where games like Battlefront, Rainbow Six Siege, and the like get criticized for being online only and not necessarily having enough content to fit the bill, does Overwatch get showered how does Overwatch get showered with such praise? I'm playing the beta right now, and while it seems fun, it seems like it could get old after a while. I honestly think it would be fun to have a single-player mode where you learn more about the characters and whatnot. Although this could change once I started playing with friends. It'll change once it comes out and I play with friends. But he's curious about the legs on Overwatch because of that.
I think the legs on Overwatch is that he's honing in on the right question about that game. Most of the people who I have talked to who've played that game really like it, really think it feels great. Blizzard has a good background of being able to have the second piece of the puzzle in place, which is that, yeah, it's really simple, it's really easy to get into, and then, oh my gosh, there's so much depth here. There's so much more to dig into. There's so much more skill I can develop over time. And if you think across all of their games, that's true. World of Warcraft is certainly... You're really going into the backlog. Yeah. I guess I'll caveat it again by saying any recent thing from Blizzard is built around
very much so.
Having that simplicity of early engagement and then hooking you and giving you lots more depth over time. And I don't know that any of us can definitively say yet with Overwatch if that's going to be the case.
Yeah, it's just 4 modes, a handful of maps. I'm sure they'll be adding new maps. It seems like the type of game that they'd be interested in updating on a continual basis.
They said new maps and new characters, and they do have a good track. I mean, they're still adding stuff to Diablo 3.
Yeah. And they just released a patch for Diablo 2.
I know, yeah.
But that said, I think he's asking a good question. I don't think... I think it's a mistake, even with a talented developer like Blizzard, to give them a pass and say that, like, oh yeah, man, this is gonna be great for a year, 2 years to come. Like, it's absolutely gonna be fun enough to last through the long-term experience. We don't know.
I certainly worry about it for me because, like, you're not really unlocking anything. And new maps are not appealing to me in multiplayer shooters.
You do unlock stuff.
Oh yeah, but that stuff's all cosmetic, right? I mean, it's
the way it unlocks should be, Kyle. What do you want?
But I don't. That's the thing. Like Call of Duty, that multiplayer mode kind of gives you more of a carrot to move along, and I worry for me that Overwatch won't have a carrot. And like I was saying, like just the promise of new maps is not enough to get me excited because when I get into a multiplayer shooter, I find like 2 or 3 maps that I really like, and I kind of stick with those. And like even when new maps come in, it doesn't necessarily be like, oh, I can't wait to try these new maps. I just enjoy the maps that I know really well.
Well, what about going with your Smash Brothers analogy? Smash Brothers 4 had a great rollout of characters after launch. Did that keep you activated?
Yeah, I guess new characters would probably be the one that keeps me most interested.
Well, there we go.
Like Josh, I also would really like a single-player campaign.
Yeah.
I really want to see more of that world in those characters.
Or just any kind of PvE content. I don't necessarily
Well, there are
need...
bots, I guess, but that's not really what you're talking about.
It's more practice than it is.
Yeah, it's interesting. I do feel like there was this round of criticism about Battlefront and a little bit about Rainbow Six Siege, but certainly Siege has found its great audience. But you don't hear much of it for Overwatch. And maybe it's just because they're compensating so hard on the online front by releasing all these short films and so many trailers and such great content, like comic books and whatnot on the side, that they're kind of filling those holes a little bit more.
And I think they have been very upfront about what this is going to be. And I feel like, and maybe it's not DICE's fault with Battlefront, but they did name it Battlefront, and so people had certain expectations about what that was going to contain. And also, they just announced the other day that there's going to be another Battlefront next year, and that's the kind of thing where I think you can give some credit to Blizzard that I would be very surprised if they announced Overwatch 2 next year,
I highly doubt that. I hope they turn into like an MMO, and then this is just kind of like the combat section. They can call it Overwatch: Titan. It'll be great. But
funny guy.
I'm really not, but thank you, Miller. I feel like you should be reviewing me. I'm so unfunny. But here's a question for you guys. And don't pull this crap of they're completely different. Let's really try and come to a conclusion here. Who in the year 2016 is a more talented developer?
Oh, God.
Blizzard or Naughty Dog?
I prefer Naughty Dog.
Prefer?
Yeah. Because I like story-driven games, like in third-person, like campaigns.
Okay.
And so I don't like Overwatch. Like I never got into Diablo. I never played World of Warcraft. I'm just like I prefer Naughty Dog personally.
I also like. There's something about the question that the more talented developer is not an answer that I feel qualified to give,
Who is
even as
more-
a person who has covered games for a decade plus.
Who is more qualified to pull off a monumental feat, a crazy achievement in the year 2016, do you think? Naughty Dog or Blizzard?
Can you define achievement?
I
Like,
think,
what do you mean?
I think Naughty Dog is more likely to take chances, and is as such is more likely to bring us things like The Last of Us, which I think like does a lot of things from its storytelling angle.
Yeah.
That are innovative and exciting. I think Blizzard, though, it's hard to argue against that track record of what we just talked about, of being able to take any given genre that they put their mind to and nail it.
But you talk about, experimental and maybe being more creative at Naughty Dog. But, I mean, it was the Uncharted series for a long time. They released Last of Us, whereas you look at Blizzard recently, we have Heroes of the Storm, we have Hearthstone, which is a weird experiment that kind of grew out of a Skunkworks project, I understand. And then Overwatch, in terms of experimental, I feel like you got to give it to Blizzard in the last couple of years.
Maybe so. Again,
but they're still working
within
within those genres, though.
The basis of your
Hearthstone?
question is
Yeah,
dicey,
a
though, to
digital
me.
card
Like, how do we know, like they're so different in what they're doing and what their goals are,
Right.
and what they're trying to do. Like, how do we know who is more talented than?
Well, look, this is like saying you can't come up with a game of the year because there's so many different genres.
Maybe so. I think game of the year, though, is ultimately like you're looking at the product itself, right?
Right.
There's so much about the behind the scenes stuff of the development of games that I promise you, if you're not in the thick of it, even us who are like visiting developers and publishers on a regular basis do not know what happens behind the scenes that makes a really talented developer sometimes not put out a game that's great. Like we know that happens. We see it happen all the time, and it's not always because they weren't good or they weren't working hard or they didn't care about the product. Sometimes it's something from the publisher. Sometimes it's a tech problem they ran into partway through. Sometimes it's a restriction of the platform that they're on. Sometimes it's money and time. There's so many things that factor in. I just don't know that with something like Blizzard or Naughty Dog, if you're trying to put them side by side,
Maybe another answer for you. So, like, you look at Blizzard, and you can look at it like their games mechanically, like, oh, this is very fun. I'm really enjoying this.
Which seems to be the point of games.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. But then you look at like a Naughty Dog games, and I guess for me, maybe I can add that caveat, is they're much more impactful. I got a lot more from playing The Last of Us, emotionally, than I ever will from Overwatch. I'll enjoy Overwatch and I'll have a good time with it, but I will walk away from Naughty Dog experiences with more memories and like I went through something.
But that's the hallmark for you of a great
For me,
developer.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but at the same time, you can make the argument that a lot of that is storytelling, not necessarily game development in terms of
true.
They're making this game that is super fun to play and that you can play for 1,000 hours, in all these different genres as well.
Right. So, talking about Uncharted 4 specifically then, Miller, what do you think Naughty Dog understands? What are they so good at? What do they nail there that no one else does?
I think that both The Last of Us and Uncharted 4 represent for Naughty Dog them hitting not only the height of the work that they've done, but also a new kind of like threshold for game developers in general in recognizing the ways that narrative can be the job of every aspect of the game. Mm-hmm. That animation, sound design, art, dialogue, gameplay, all can be in service to narrative. And I think as this podcast airs, people are just digging into Uncharted 4, and I've had the good fortune to like play it ahead of time and finish it. And it's a really amazing game. And like Last of Us, it has something to say about the human condition.
Wow.
That is sort of profound and important and like memorable in a way that I think they were beginning to touch on with Uncharted 1, 2, 3. Those were all, I like all those games. I know some people aren't huge fans of them, but I really like them. I think they're great games. But they've taken that formula and they've taken it to the next level of really keeping the fun banter, keeping the humor, keeping the wild Indiana Jones adventure, but layering in something about the nature of like what it means to be a grown-up, what it means to be an adult and to look back at your past and have to come to terms with it, what it means to be in a relationship.
What it means to swing on a rope.
And like that stuff is...
You're not going to get that from Junkrat, you guys.
You're not going to get it from Junkrat.
Hey, you don't know that.
I think weirdly, even though they tonally they're totally different.
Yeah.
The Last of Us and Uncharted 4, and they're not trying to go for the same thing. I think in a lot of ways people will finish Uncharted 4 and be more likely to kind of think about it in the same way as they do Last of Us than they will the earlier Uncharted games.
It's in that tier. It's in a Last of Us realm for you.
I think it is. I think it's really, really good. And I mean, I wrote an opinion piece on the site just a few days ago that like I really think it is a masterclass for people who want to understand game development and to understand the way that all these different parts of a game can service narrative.
So you visited Naughty Dog once, twice?
A couple times.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've been there a couple times as well for cover story trips.
Yeah.
I'm curious, just visiting the studio, what you've learned about their process that separates them. Again, you mentioned, I mean, it's fair to say we're like taking a glimpse through a window and have no idea what actually goes on behind the scenes there on these trips. But
I think Naughty Dog has like the actual core Naughty Dog team is not as gigantic as you would think it would be. They do
That's
a lot
true.
of these days. They have to do a lot of outsourcing, I think, for some of their art assets and things like that. But the actual team is not this sprawling, huge team like you see with like Bungie on Destiny or like the Assassin's Creed teams that famously have these like hundreds of people on their team.
yeah.
Naughty Dog's core creative team is relatively contained, several dozen people at any one time, and every one of those people is really committed to their craft and to what they're doing. I think they attract some of the best people in the industry.
I think a lot of it's that. Just they got the ball rolling through working their asses off back in the PS1, PS2 days. And then it's like people want to put Naughty Dog on their resume and only the best of the best are allowed. And it's just this self-fulfilling prophecy. It's just this ball rolling downhill coupled with Sony having a lot of faith because of a nearly perfect track record and just writing crazy checks, right? And giving them the time.
I think that's the case. I mean, there are moments in Uncharted 4, as there were to a certain degree with Last of Us, but I think even more with Uncharted 4, where you're like, that 5 seconds of gameplay must have cost so much money and
are you
so
doing?
much time. And like just to communicate this one thing, sometimes things that like you might not even be guaranteed to do, right? Like just a thing that your character might happen to go over to this one place and do. And you just invested in that 5 second, like I walked over there and I looked at this thing, and they've created this beautiful vista and like panned the camera and done all this awesome stuff that makes you realize the investment that was involved in putting together something like this.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think. In answer to your question, it's the people that are involved there that makes them able to do that primarily. It's probably more work than we would like to believe that a game developer has to put in.
Crazy hours, I'm sure.
I am praising all the things about Naughty Dog about the products they put out, but we're not having the conversation right now about what it means to be a game developer right now and to be a good game developer and the problems that creates. I worry about studios like Naughty Dog and the hours they have to put in and what the effects that has on things like a family life and that kind of stuff.
We talked about that exact issue on this podcast with Jason Rubin in that interview. He talked about, the way Naughty Dog started was just insane hours. And I don't think much has changed.
And that's very possible. I'm not on the ground there. I'm not going to make any conclusions regarding that, but it's hard for me to believe that a game like this comes together without that kind of with a team that's small and focused at the core, without just crazy hours. And I worry about that. But ultimately, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the final product of
Swinging
the game.
around is fun.
And that is, it's really good.
So Reiner last week on the podcast, he had about 3/4 of the way through the conversation, he threw out this nugget where he's like, but I mean, it's the best looking game I've ever seen in my life. But anyways, and I'm curious like what your take on that is. For me personally, it was a game you reviewed that holds that crown, which is Order 1886. I think that game is stupid good looking. And so is Uncharted 4, Miller, the best game you've ever seen visually?
Order 1886 is a remarkably good looking game in still frame in some sense.
Okay.
I don't know that it has the same beauty of motion that Uncharted 4
animation
offers.
detail. Okay.
It's not just animation, it's the way that art integrates with animation. That's the sort of hard to define thing that's not just about the art of not just about the discipline of animation or the discipline of art, but the way that it's tied together and the ways that small interactions in this game create a sense of immersion on a moment-to-moment basis.
Seems to be like the theme of this podcast is the game design je ne sais quoi. That there's something in there that we can't.
There are things that are hard to define. They're not impossible to define. They're complicated to talk about, though. And Uncharted 4 has had those conversations. And we can have those conversations, but they're complicated. I mean, you're talking about the ways that... there's a moment in Uncharted 4, this is going to sound like a really small, simple thing, but you have to think about it as like one tiny thing, and that this kind of thing is reflected throughout the entire game. There's a moment in Uncharted 4 where you're driving a Jeep, and you can get in and out of the Jeep. And if you get in on the passenger side of the Jeep, and there's a passenger there, the passenger leans back. Like they lean back to let you kind of crawl over them, get into the driver's seat. And like this simple little thing that you're like, why is Miller talking about this stupid thing of like a passenger leaning back as being important? If you can imagine every little thing that you do in the game having that level of detail to it, it makes it feel like your interactions, the choice of whether you went in the driver's side door, or you went in the passenger door, or if you came over the hood, or if you came in from the back end of the Jeep, all of those things have been accounted for, even though any one of them might never be seen by the player.
And it's not like other developers don't think of this stuff. It's
but
just
it's
a matter
really
of time
expensive.
and budget.
Yes.
Absolutely. Like I saw a developer tweet out today, God, I forget who it was, but it was a compilation of all of the awesome times that Nathan Drake in Uncharted 4 like touches the walls. Like it's been a thing, I think it was in the last couple of Uncharted where he's next to a wall, he'll just reach out and touch it real quick. And it's such a subtle thing, but it looks so smooth and so natural. Or even you think of like, you know, the killing animations in Last of Us and how it incorporates the environment dynamically wherever you're at. It's just crazy detail.
Yeah, and it's those little things that taken together lend the ability for Reiner to say like, oh, this is the prettiest game ever, right? It is beautiful. I mean, just the environmental art in still is great, but it really is the way that it integrates with what you're doing in the world, and the sense that every action you might take has been accounted for, and you feel like you're making decisions that result in these things happening that are really visually compelling.
Yeah. And if you're interested in more Uncharted 4 talk, because it seems like there's a lot to unpack here, keep in mind that May 26th, with that episode airing that day, we're kicking off the next Game Informer GI Game Club, where we're going to be breaking down Uncharted 4. So if you want to play along with us, I would strongly encourage you to play up through Chapter 10 for that first episode. We're not going to spoil anything beyond that. I think a strong majority of the people sitting in on it, which in theory actually could be quite a few editors, which will be fun, we're only going to play that far.
Hey, did we figure out if you mean beat Chapter 9 and stop, or beat Chapter 10?
Up through Chapter 10.
So beat Chapter 10.
Finish Chapter 10. I don't know what it is or why that's a dividing spot, but that is what Reiner recommended, is going through Chapter 10. So play through Chapter 10 of Uncharted 4 if you'd like, and then on May 26th with that episode, we're going to have a big old discussion all about it. So be sure to send any feedback, those little details that you notice. If you think you can define the je ne sais quoi, please email into podcast@gameinformer.com and let us know what you think of Uncharted 4 up until that point. But we should probably move on to something else. Kyle, as quick as you can possibly convey, tell me about Pocket Card Junkie.
Jockey. Horses, solitaire, humor.
This is 3DS Pokemon developer Game Freak made this weird thing.
Are you doing like a poetic thing right now? Like
This
one
is a haiku.
word?
Beat poetry.
Yeah. No, it's like, so, quickly, I guess. You race horses, And the way you like gather up energy during the race is you play solitaire quickly and well. And you sort of build up all this energy, and then in the final stretch, you can kind of expend all that energy to make it through the finish line.
Is it free to play? Is it fun?
No. Yes. It is. It's not free to play, and it is fun. So I'm trying to keep like there's some other aspects of the game, like you get new horses like every time they age up. Once they do like 3 or 4 races, you can either go into like the mature races and race with your older horse, or you can get a new horse.
Do your horses die, Kyle?
They retire.
What happened to them?
I haven't killed any horses yet, but they do go to a farm, and you can go visit that farm. So it's not just some lie.
So they're still there.
And then you can have those horses breed, actually. So if you have like 2 really good horses,
We've seen
you can have
Silicon
them breed.
Valley.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
It's fun and it's cool. The one sort of hurdle that I've come across is that I crossed this line where it got insanely difficult, and I can't figure out what I'm doing wrong all of a sudden. Like,
Did you forget how to play solitaire?
no, I didn't.
Did you forget how to make horses? Never mind.
Oh no, please continue. But it's like weird things. Like all of a sudden, the prices in the shop to like buy items that help you race faster like quintupled, and like if you did,
But there's no real money.
no, it's not a
microtransactions or
free to play
anything?
game at all.
Okay.
Yeah, and the other thing is like there's this guy the horse that teaches you how to play. His name is Horse Off Course. He will come. There we go.
There's good game writing, you idiots. Just write that stuff. It's funny.
He will come in and give you pointers for like, hey, well, you got a bad start this time. You got to play better at solitaire.
So he's a horse.
He is a horse.
I want to take
Of
a step
course,
back
Miller.
here.
But even he will come in and he'll be like, you know what? You did really well that time. I don't have any advice for you. The other horses were just faster.
How does the fiction explain that he can talk to you?
Don't worry about it, man. They put peanut butter in his mouth. And then somebody talks.
Yeah, it's like Day the Tentacle. There's talking horses all over the place in games. You just never ask questions.
Is
What
there
the
like a
hell's going on?
magic thing going on?
I think so. You do die in the beginning and then you come back to life.
This is what I heard.
Yeah, it's very strange. It's
Driver San Francisco-esque.
yeah, that's
You die?
yeah. You a horse. You fall
You
off
get
your
trampled
horse.
by a horse?
You get trampled by a horse, and everything's black, and this guy brings you back to life, so you can continue to be a jockey.
I would want to get away from a horse.
Well, no, man, that's your dream.
You got to
dude.
get back on the horse.
That's
right.
right.
Okay.
It's
You
your
heard that?
dream.
But
I like the humor in it is funny because like you'll lose a race and your trainer will just be like very
So are you
sarcastically.
You're
like,
undead?
Yeah, you come back to life. I don't
So
know why
you're
you're confused by this.
You're undead.
You're hollow, I
what
think
that
is how they
means,
phrase it.
right?
Oh, I don't think you're undead. I think you.
Do you eat brains, Kyle?
No, you don't eat brains, and your skin looks normal. So no, I don't think you're undead. I think you just are given life again.
so
You're
that's
resurrected.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
this pocket card jockey. The other big Game Freak announcement this week, Pokemon Sun and Moon trailer. Kyle, your Pokemon reviewer. I'm curious what
Yeah.
your take on that is.
I like what I saw. I like the new. It looks like they changed the models for the protagonist, like the characters in the world and stuff.
Yeah, a little more complex, a little more detailed.
Yeah, and that's like I guess it's kind of a small thing to call out, but I mean, you look at that character the whole game, so it's nice to see them improved a little bit there.
Yeah.
I like the new setting.
Hawaii.
And the starters are cute. I like the kitten because I like cats, but everyone seems to like the owl. Everyone's mad at me for not liking the owl more.
That owl kicks ass.
The owl wearing the bra is pretty cool.
And everybody hates Poplio, the seal. No one cares about him.
F that thing.
Yeah, that's
Miller, do
right.
you know the lore of Pokemon's world? How each game it's set in a different real world
It's
location.
inspired by.
Yes, I knew
Yeah,
about
so they
that.
kind of take that geography and make the twist on it. Oh, so you knew about that?
I knew about
So
that.
you know all about Pokemon lore.
I know all the things.
Yeah, I'm a little bit worried showing in that trailer all the different camera angles because Game Freak is not the strongest company technically. They're no, Naughty Dog, and so like seeing the variety of camera angles, I just worry because
I feel like I didn't see a lot other than just like the straight over the shoulder.
there's some where it's much lower, there's some where it's higher up, but
Okay.
just the camera in Lumio City and X and Y. I understand it was the
Yeah.
first time out of the gate. People have been yelling at me on Twitter about it, but it was such garbage. Like
Yeah, it was
them
very
trying
confusing.
to embrace that 3D ability of the 3DS.
It does look lower behind you because like even X and Y, like the majority in the game was still overhead basically.
Basically,
You
yeah.
start out this game by dying and you're brought back to life.
It's just Game Freak's thing. The badass
All the
Pokemon-
games from now on, you die.
You do kill your Pokemon constantly and bring them back to life.
Yeah, it's kind of
but they white out. It's very confusing
They
why they
pass
phrase
out.
it like that.
But I'm excited. It looks cool.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like a dramatic, like Pokemon is known to be just kind of consistent.
Yeah.
But it looks cool. Hawaii looks cool. And,
Last Pokemon game on 3DS. You had to put money down.
no, I don't think so.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, considering Black and White 2 came out on DS and the 3DS had been out for like 2 years at that point or something.
It was really crazy.
No, it's not the last one on 3DS.
All right. Speaking of last one, we should briefly touch on this Disney stuff. Really crazy news broke on Tuesday about Disney announcing in its investors call and whatnot that they are not going to make any more Disney Infinities. They're shutting down Avalanche Software, and they are only going to license out to other game developers. They're not going to have internal video game development anymore, which it's so crazy to have a company as big as Disney
just not engaging with this whole medium.
They've been... It's unfair to call it dabbling, but they've been trying. People are really pushing internally. They've done great stuff like Split Second. I mean, there's a long history of Disney occasionally making good stabs in game development, and just to finally kind of put the nail in the coffin on their attempts is a crazy time.
Yeah, I don't understand what's going on there. It does seem, especially now, that they have so many of the properties that rule the world under their banner, for them not to invest heavily in internal development just seems crazy to me.
The detail here to think about is, I mean, they have properties such as Frozen, which is gigantic, surpassing Angry Birds even. And they released a game, what is it, Frozen Free Fall on iOS, and it just makes bank. And so at that point, why have this development studio out in Salt Lake City and employ 300 people to make these Disney Infinity games that, as Kyle and I visited, and we were just talking about this morning, have that confusing release strategy where there's so many different packages and experiences, and trying to convey all that in marketing bullet points, you can't get it across that easily.
The one example that I brought up this morning is like one of the things we saw when we went for the cover trip was what was basically amounted to like a Disney kart racer that was developed by the guys that did Sega Sonic All-Stars, the good Sonic like kart racer.
Yeah.
There is a game that exists that is a Disney kart racer that uses all Disney and Star Wars characters, and like I don't even really know how to get it. Like like
if I put a gun to your head and said I want to play that today,
I would be like, I think I have to buy the figures, and I think maybe it's DLC. Like it's stuff like that. Like it wasn't clear exactly how to. There were all these cool. They brought in all these developers to make these cool like aspects of Disney Infinity, and it was hard to break down, and it was a children's game.
But you're also talking. We're talking about like one very specific game,
totally
in the wider sphere of like all the games you could make with Marvel and Star Wars and Disney characters.
And it's not that there's not going to be any more Star Wars games. Clearly, we just talked about earlier. There are. They're still licensing out their stuff, just not internal anymore.
Make dumb mobile stuff that makes you billions of dollars,
including their strategy of like taking popular mobile games and attaching Disney licenses to it,
and then and then just license out the other games like you do Star Wars.
Here's Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney. Here's his quote.
How is he?
He's doing pretty well. He had this to say in Mike Futter's write-up.
He wrote into the podcast?
Yeah. This is from Bob Iger from California.
Dear Ben, I really like your podcast.
Stop saying crap so much. We thought we had a really good opportunity to launch our own product in that space. I realized it was console space, but it was also essentially a large component of it was the Toys to Life stuff. In fact, we did quite well with the first iteration of it, and we did okay with the second iteration. But that business is a changing business, and we did not have enough confidence in the business in terms of it being stable enough to stay in it from a self-publishing perspective. We actually made a good product. I give the developer a lot of credit for the product that they made. It was extremely well received. The truth of the matter is that the risks that we saw at the beginning when we started this caught up with us.
I kind of got, I don't know, reading Iger's quote in Mike's story, like, I got the sense that they were like, this is just too expensive. Like, we're making money, but we're just putting so much into it.
It's very much like Polygon has a cover story all about the history of Epic, and it feels very much like Epic's conclusion, where in that story they had quotes talking about, Epic thinking about Gears of War 4 and doing the math and just realizing there is no universe where we can make a lot of money off this. Best case scenario, we break even if we invest $100 million in this thing. Game development's tough.
Yeah.
But it's sad to see Avalanche Software go down.
It is. I really like. I was really starting to get into Disney Infinity with my daughter and stuff like that. Like we've been playing a lot of 3, and I've got like a little shelf with all the figures.
And Bob Iger canceled your daughter.
He canceled my daughter. She's not grown up anymore. She's done. She stopped there. She's going to have to make do with her 2 Zootopia Disney Infinity figures, which she was just showing to her grandparents on Skype the other day.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Did you sit her down and explain what happened?
No, not yet.
But
we'll save that.
Yeah, it's sad. We had
no Easter Bunny, no Disney Infinity, no Santa Claus.
I don't know if you remember months ago on this podcast, we had John Vignacchi from Disney on talking about Disney Infinity 3. he's one of my favorite people because he works for Disney and he screamed on the podcast
Yeah.
"F you,"
He was
which
on,
is my favorite.
He was on our Kingdom Hearts 2 episode of Replay, which is
Yes,
recent also.
that's
So check
right.
that out.
Yeah, it's super nice guy, and he had a bunch of tweets and like, "I'd love to talk more about this. I can't really yet. I would love to in the future."
He's a very emotional man.
He's very well, yeah, sure. He then tweeted out a GIF. I'm gonna effing cry just thinking about this. It's the GIF from Toy Story 3 of all the toys going towards the Inferno, and the GIF does not include the alien saving them. That is his analogy for Avalanche Software closing: is toys holding hands going towards their death.
Accepting
The inevitable.
of mortality. Yeah.
Lord, it was excruciating to like connect those dots of this Pixar film and the current situation at Disney. But we put up a lot of content for Disney Infinity 3.0. One of them was an interview with the general manager of Avalanche Software, John Blackburn, who's a super smart guy and he's been in the industry forever. But there's a 20-minute interview with him just talking about the history of licensed games. And I went back and watched it again, and it's brutal. Like, he talks about just what a tough business it was, and it was just one Hail Mary after the other trying to stay in business. And then they finally got Disney Infinity, and they're like, maybe this is a package that'll be sustainable for development going forward. And it turns out, not so much. So then there were two, Lego Dimensions and Amiibos, I guess. Oh, Skylanders.
Skylanders.
I guess there's the giant Skylanders.
Yeah, Amiibos are a little different because they're like
That's true.
They're almost like what's the word I'm trying to think of? Where they're just sort of secondary to the core games.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, definitely. But sad day, sad week for the industry.
Yeah.
It is. It feels like if a longer view would allow Disney to see that like gaming's not going away, and it is worth your while to invest now. It was worth your while to invest 10 years ago. It is more worth your while now to invest, even if you're not seeing immediate return, just for the mind share you gain by, having some well cultivated studios that have had a few years to ramp up and have some franchises that they've ramped up on.
Yeah.
But we'll still see some. I'm sure we're going to see Star Wars games and Marvel games in the future, but not developed internally.
Definitely. Well, if you're interested in more Disney chat and what it's like inside Disney, we talk about it in the interview with the Angry Birds directors coming up in a bit. But for right now, we should talk about some emails that we get in from the readers. And welcome back to the Game Informer Show. We got some hot emails from people that watch or
Hot
listen.
emails?
Well, we already read Bob's, so
Yeah.
I think his name was Josh, but yeah.
no Bob Iger.
No, Bob Iger.
Oh,
from
Lord, I'm
Disney
sorry.
Samus.
Callback.
I'm
Come on.
sorry. But
Josh's was good too. but
Who
you
can
did.
say if Bob Iger is going to win Question of the Week?
We don't know.
Whichever email we like the best, we choose as email of the week and we send them out a mysterious, lovely gift.
Okay.
All right, so kicking things off. Hi, guys and gal. Kim finally on yet? She was just on a couple weeks ago. She's great. Doug here from Fort Collins, Colorado. Love the podcast and what you do. Keep keeping on. First quick question. When is Sir Matt Miller updating his Destiny lore guide? That guide is amazing.
Did he
says.
really ask that?
He really did.
I want to do that.
Do you want to just explain what it is for people?
Yeah,
that,
so we did. I think it's fair to say that the Destiny lore is a thing that you either care about or you don't. But I think the evidence suggests there's a lot of people who do care about it, and I think Bungie would be wise to recognize that. Because when we posted this big article that was a sort of a summary of all the Destiny stuff,
and this is not a breezy summary.
it's not a breezy summary. I mean, it's like 10 pages of content.
As we've talked about, Miller printed out the Grimoire cards.
I did a lot of research on this thing.
Yeah.
But like we had like 1 million people almost who checked this story out, and so yeah, I want to go back to it. The part of the trick is that I didn't want that story to just be like, well, here's Miller's interpretation of stuff. I wanted to write it and then spend the time to work with Bungie to make sure we had it right.
And that was just on the cover story trip, right? Bouncing
Yeah,
up.
at the time it was connected to us doing coverage for The Taken King, and so at the time there was this sense of like there's this wealth of lore out there that has been there, but a lot of the people even who play this game a lot don't know.
Maybe some of the
virtually
people
anything
who
about.
developed the game.
That's possible. And so I wanted there to be a chance to work with the story team at Bungie to see like, okay, do I have this right? And they corrected me on some stuff, like that final version that posted online reflects the changes that Bungie said, like, well, you don't actually have this right. This isn't. You talk about the Titans when for the Titan Guardians first showed up, they did this thing. That's not how it worked. Like, and so we made those changes before we published it with the goal of there being if lengthy, at least still a digestible version of the fiction.
So we need to wait for a time when we have a lot of contact with Bungie developers again. Is that
that's the hope?
answer?
And so
okay.
I do plan to update that story or do a new version of the story that reflects both the Taken King stuff, and hopefully sometime soon we'll get an idea of where they're going next. And so we can get we can orient the update of that story towards like, well, this is what's coming,
right,
and this is why this is important for you to know about it.
Gotcha.
So
cool.
We'll see.
There we go. Paul Sirik from Grand Rapids, Michigan writes in and says, after watching this week's The Many Missteps of Battleborn test chamber, it got me thinking, when you go out on trips and are shown a developer's game in progress and they ask for feedback, is it ever difficult or uncomfortable to give them the hard truth that maybe what they're working on just plain looks like garbage? That is not a thing.
That's not a thing we say to any developer.
First of all, it's rare if I don't think it's ever happened that we've gone on a cover story trip and thought this looks like garbage.
And we first of all we before we go on a cover story trip, we learn about a game and we try our very best to find games that we are excited about, that we want to share with the readers, that we are enthusiastic about, and that includes Battleborn.
Yeah,
just
for sure.
because like my ultimate opinion of the final game is not super hot doesn't mean that we didn't at one point really believe a lot in that project and want to share it with people, and that's why we did the story on it. Nor would we ever be the kind of jerks to say this is garbage to anybody who works as hard as game developers work.
Do you guys have situations in mind though where people have asked for feedback and you've had to be like, this part of the game I don't know if I'm feeling?
Maybe with like PR people, like at a show, like at an E3 situation, they might be like, what do you think? And I would, if there was, I'd be like, usually I would temper it and be like, I like this part. This part didn't really appeal to me very much. I've done that like on occasion.
And that's just a personal thing. It's not like you saying change this.
Yeah,
in the game.
It's like I didn't really like how the shooting felt there or something like that. That's not a real example, but
shooting felt.
Yeah, write that down.
I also think that for the people who play a lot of betas, like real betas, not those like marketing betas, but like real betas that are about like, let's figure out how to improve this game, are maybe familiar with this. But certainly for those of us who work in the press who sometimes see games very early while they're still in development, you learn pretty quickly that a game can go from this is not fun, this does not look good, this does not play well, to this is a great game in the space of like a month or a couple months. And so even sometimes we will have previews of stories, preview stories for games that are a couple months out that we're still like, like we're hopeful about this. We think it's pretty cool. And then, you play the final version in its totality and it doesn't work. Yeah. But I mean, even on every cover story trip, there's something to get excited about. There's something cool to kind of focus in on. Maybe I just have like a laser beam focus for specific things in games, and I really, really like some things. Like I remember on the Disney Infinity trip, just to tie it all together, I remember seeing like the lighting and the design of the X-Wing and the Falcon in that space combat stuff. I still think it looks amazing. And when they showed us that, I was like, okay, that design looks so great. And the figure design in Disney Infinity specifically, I think is amazing. Well, and Ben, you share my enthusiasm for just like what developers do on a day-to-day basis. I mean, a lot of times when we go on these cover stories, just the people who work at these studios, if you make a choice to go into game development, the time sacrifice that you're going to make and the hard work you're going to put in and the disciplines you've got to learn, and then finding out how to work with other people. These are really interesting, really creative people by and large. They are all smarter than us. And like I think a lot of the joy of some of those cover stories and the online coverage we do afterwards isn't always just about the games. It's about like let's look at these people and the work that they do and highlight that. And so even when a game is very early and there's not a lot to say about it, there's often something very interesting to observe about the way that these people do their work, the way they're advancing the tech, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. All right, moving on. We have Isaac Brady from Coon Rapids, Minnesota. He says, I wrote in a question for the first time a couple of weeks ago, and to my delighted surprise, you read it on the show. It made me wonder really how significant it was that you read my question. How many questions do you get each week? Is it really special when my question is read? Yes, Isaac, it is. We're averaging 50 or so emails a week, so you should feel very special. So there you go, Isaac. You're the most special person around. Hey, GI Crew, says Michael from St. Paul. So many Minnesota fans.
Hey,
That's cool. We like Minnesota people.
It makes me think that we should just have a small Game Informer show get together, like at a brewery or something.
We should tape in front of a live audience.
Oh, at like a convention of some kind.
We did that at the GameStop Expo last year, and it was very stressful. and the acoustics were terrible.
We should do it every week.
Okay. I would not be opposed to that. If you'd like some sort of Game Informer show meetup where we could just meet up and a dozen of us get some beers, I'm more than up for that. So please write into podcast@gameinformer.com. But Michael from St. Paul writes in, he says, I was wondering if any of you are big fans of comics. And if so, do you have any advice for someone wanting to get into them? For a while, I've been wanting to start reading comics, but it's a little overwhelming when there's so much history and so many different storylines. I wanted to ask the GI staff because you guys are awesome and have the correct opinions.
Yeah, we can probably skip this question, right, Miller?
Yeah, moving on. Let's see. Josh Jones writes in. No, Miller, briefly. Okay.
Come on.
If you have to pick one comic
what are you reading now that he
that
should
is
jump
better
into,
than
maybe?
anyone else?
Yeah.
I think right now one of my favorite comics is Saga. That game, that comic is
and
really
they start
good.
where?
Well, it's not a particularly old comic, so you start at number 1, and it's a great sort of sci-fi epic, but for grown-ups. It has some grown-up content in it. So
What type of stuff? What kind of sexy stuff we talking about?
It has some cussing, has some nudity. It has some
Full frontal nudity?
Yes, actually, it does.
Full frontal noodly?
Noodly.
Hanson's never seen that before.
Saga's a really good comic. If you're pointing me like one thing that's coming out right now, I'd also point people towards just a personal favorite of mine right now. I think Rick Remender, who is a comics writer, has been doing some amazing work in recent years. He's got lots of sort of independently written books that aren't part of like Marvel Comics or DC or anything like that. If you want a good sort of action-packed story with great art, he always works with these great artists. His Black Science, Low, Tokyo Ghost, these are all really, really great things. But there's also the other thing I would tell somebody that's a really good avenue if you haven't gotten into comics, but you specifically have an interest in that like mass market thing of like the superhero comics.
Let's go specifically. Let's burrow in because I think a lot of people saw Civil War, Captain America, and they say, God, I want to absorb that Civil War storyline. Where do I start? How compact is it? What do I need?
So the cheapest and most comprehensive way that if you were just like, I've never read comics, but I love those Marvel movies, or it'd be fun to kind of be in on those conversations about that kind of stuff. Marvel now has a service that you can pay. I think it's something like $10 a month for Marvel Unlimited.
Okay.
And you have access. You don't have the most immediate comics that have just come out. It's like 6 months back and older stuff, but they have relatively comprehensive collections of a lot of their like biggest and most interesting stories.
So you can pay $10 and read all of Civil War.
Yes.
Which is how much content? Like how many pages are we talking?
I mean, a lot. I mean, you're talking. I think they have some. I'm shooting off the cuff here, but I want to say I read somewhere they have something like 17,000 comics that you have access to through that service.
But what about the Civil War storyline specifically?
Yes.
Like how much content is that if you wanted to get through that?
I don't know. Civil War was a while ago. I want to say it was 8 issues. And
this is a really stupid issues, meaning just like the single this is super thin thingies.
Yeah, an issue is like 22 pages of comics.
Okay.
Right. And so this is their like digital thing, right? So if you're not at this point, if you're not collecting comics like paper comics and putting them in with bags and boards and putting them in a box, sure, there's that whole market of people. But I'm assuming
those people.
Well,
I'm not one of those effing dweebs. God, if one of them was around here right now, I'd knock the wind right out of them.
I hate when they come on podcasts.
Pull his underwear.
If you don't have if you're not talking about one of those guys,
you can even call him that.
You're talking about like I want to get into these stories. I like looking at the art, and I think if you're getting into comics now, digital is a really good option for you. Like whether you're reading a subscription service like Marvel Unlimited or you're going through Comixology.
That seems to be the front runner.
Yep.
Okay.
Comixology is like basically an Amazon company at this point.
Okay.
But they have a really excellent storefront and system for buying digital comics, reading them in a way that like makes them look great.
Great. And quickly, I want to throw out as well, like I wasn't really into comics. I read Simpsons comics as a kid.
Okay.
But when I started at Game Informer, I was like, I should understand this world a little bit better. And just on a very surface level, I was like, okay, Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns seems to be the way to go. Read both of those. I am constantly glad that I did that.
Yeah.
They're classics for a reason. I think they are important stories to digest.
We could do, if we wanted to go off of games, we could do literally hours just talking about like comic recommendations.
Wade in the booth, you want to kill Miller's mic? Real quick, thanks. We got to move on. All right. Josh Jones writes in from Ohio. He says, hey, GI crew, with E3 just around the corner, I'm excited for new releases and the promise of great things to come. Do you ever see E3 being open to the public or even move to a more centralized location in the U.S.? I would love to go eventually to experience the excitement. And also, who on staff are going to E3 this year? And he's looking forward to the coverage and the annual Game Informer E3 tour, which will be fun. So do you ever see a more open approach to E3 coming?
I see a public day, maybe. Like TGS has public days, right?
Yeah. I don't know about this year. Seems like if that was going to happen, they would have announced it by now because that thing's coming up next month.
Yeah.
Real
I don't
soon.
think- I think it would be a pretty big shakeup if they had to change. I think there are so many public shows that I would ask if there's a point to it to some degree.
Yeah. But there is, you talk about PAX and how open it is and it's so much fun on a community level, but there's not the thrill of like big new releases or big new announcements that there is at E3. Like they're announcing a game and now it's playable on the show floor, or at least there's a booth area dedicated to it, which is cool to absorb. Are you jaded towards conventions at this point, Jeffem?
No. It just seems like there are a lot of them out there and there are a lot of options. I guess to me, what would appeal is getting together with a lot of people who share your enthusiasm for that, and you definitely don't need to go to E3 for that.
Yeah.
One of the reasons E3 is the way that it is that it was fundamentally built as a business convention for people to do business.
Yeah.
For press to see stuff, for business, like for buyers to see product.
Yeah.
And as a result, that was where everybody converged.
Follow the money, people.
Yes, it became this big thing, and then of course that means that people who are into games want to be there. But that doesn't serve necessarily the original goal of what E3 was, and so they would need to change their focus, I think.
Yeah.
Which isn't a good thing or a bad thing. They would have to change.
And clearly, it's a weird year. There's so many publishers that aren't going, and so they might need to change their focus just to.
Damn. I thought
Get
they
some more
were
cash.
talking about. I don't.
There's always
follow up on
rumors
this
and
stuff.
whatnot, but I don't know exactly what's going on.
That they had been talking about doing a public day, but maybe I just.
I was
don't
just
know.
gonna add the one other small part of that question is like
Yeah.
moving to a central location.
Yeah.
I would probably just stay on the West Coast just because so much development is based out
Yeah.
there. I would imagine.
I would
Maybe
love-
move to San Francisco.
Well, they have had it in a long
Las
time ago
Vegas
in
for a
different
while, right?
places,
Yeah.
but LA, I think they were talking about leaving for a while, and then they signed a deal to stay there.
But I would love like a PAX Chicago or something more centralized. Maybe it's just the Midwest aspect of us
Chicago?
talking. Yeah, I would love to see something like that. But as for our coverage, write in what you want to see. Podcastinggameinformer.com for Game Informer's E3 coverage. We're just starting to plan
that
stuff
together.
out now, and whatnot. But I don't think Kyle or Miller are going, right?
Yeah, we'll be staying home, but that also means that you'll probably see more of us on the side.
true.
Yeah,
for sure.
we have learned over the years that like having some people who work from home here to handle just analysis and doing commentary on press conferences and just getting the assets. It's so hard to get a good online connection when you're out in LA during E3. That having some folks back home, there's so much stuff that we can follow remotely now that we keep a lot of people these days back at the office.
I am sad I'm not gonna be able to play Zelda though. I really want to.
It's going to be an interesting
That's
thing.
gonna be like the only thing that's gonna be there from Nintendo. So.
What a weird time for Zelda fans. All right. Adam writes in and says, hello, GI crew. How many of you know much about the First World War? If you have several hours of passive listening time available, please listen to Dan Carlin's Hardcore History podcast. The 6 episodes that focus on the Great War are called Blueprint for Armageddon. With the new Battlefield game on the way, I think everyone owes it to themselves to brush up on what actually happened. Which I love that email. Maybe it's just because I listened to a lot of hardcore history recently. Like almost the entire time I was playing Stardew Valley, which was, 100 hours or so. I listen to Hardcore History, and it is a really great podcast. His voice is funny, and it really it cracks me up.
Well, I'm on board.
All right. No, I shouldn't make fun of Dan.
Does he call a lot of stuff crap?
How dare you? No, but Dan Carlin, like, he has like this very theatrical way of talking, and when the topic is like,
He's passionate.
maybe it's just because I jumped around so much, but he'll be talking about like, and then the Spartans stood on the hill and they said, "Hell no, we won't." Yada yada yada. But then like he'll jump through history, and another episode will be about like something from 1963, and he'll be reading some letter from a nurse, and he has like the exact same tone where he's like, "But there's no way we can finish off this war or this troubling incident." The point is, he has the same reading tone for everybody.
Sounds like a wrestler.
It's just my Jesse Ventura, I realize, coming through.
Yeah.
But a great recommendation for people that are hot and heavy about World War I right now because of Battlefield. Battlefield 1 got announced last Friday, to an amazing success. Like, people are losing their minds over that trailer, and it comes right on the heels of people losing their minds, crapping all over the Infinite Warfare trailer, the Call of Duty thing.
Most disliked YouTube video or
versus
something like
this
that.
in the top 10.
Yeah.
This is one of the most liked trailers for
funny.
Battlefield.
And it's got to be about the eras, right? I mean, how many
I guess.
futuristic military shooters have we had in a row?
Within
that all of
Infinite
a sudden-
Warfare that people didn't like.
It's the Modern Warfare remastered, only being bundled with it as well. But it's fascinating to see like this ebb and flow where, you know, people vote EA the worst company in the history of international companies. And now it's like this trailer comes out and somehow it feels like EA are the underdogs with Battlefield. Like, yeah, getting back to the roots. And I feel it too. Like, I love Battlefield 1942 a lot, and I'm really excited to return to a clunkier era.
We haven't been there much with video games, so I think it would be cool.
Oh, you think so, Kyle? We have Sim, who writes in from London. He says, "Hello, GI crew."
You do it with a British accent, please?
Nope. As soon as I saw the trailer for Battlefield 1, but I can read it as Dan Carlin from Hardcore History if you're interested. But as soon as I saw the trailer for Battlefield 1, I couldn't help but be reminded of another World War I based first-person shooter called Codename Eagle. It was released by a then unknown studio called DICE. Did any of you have the pleasure of playing Codename Eagle? And quick correction, they were called Refraction Games, but a lot of the founders of DICE and those original developers, this was their first big first-person shooter outing, was Codename Eagle.
PC game or? Okay.
He notes, the game was a mess. You couldn't complete the single-player campaign without it crashing. The multiplayer was only playable after a community-made patch fixed a spontaneous explosion bug. And there was
That sounds
only
pretty cool.
ever one multiplayer
List of my
server
favorite things.
which served the same map continuously.
Yes.
But it remains one of my all-time favorite multiplayer experiences. No shooter has come close to the freedom and anarchy it had.
See, man, you don't need that many maps. I was talking about it earlier.
Just look
have
at
one good
Dota,
map.
man. One
This
map.
is see this email is a testament to the idea that like every game is somebody's favorite game.
yeah.
Yeah, there is a passionate community out there. It's like it is the proto version of those Battlefield moments that everybody loves. There is the community out there that played a lot of super janky Codename Eagle, but I don't think enough people have that framing in mind of that this is more of a homecoming than even going back to Battlefield 1942. It's going back to some earlier developments with Codename Eagle. We have a video back when we did the Battlefield 3 cover story trip with Lars on the DICE team talking about the early days of working on Codename Eagle and how it informed Battlefield and stuff. So you can Google that if you're interested in it, but I take it none of you played Codename Eagle?
Nope.
No.
Afraid not. No.
All right. Well, there we go. Maybe we need to look
Apparently
up
it's still
some
alive.
YouTube
We'll
videos.
do it on an episode of Replay soon, maybe.
I would love to do an old
can do that.
multiplayer game. It'd just
That'd
be
be
so
cool.
tough to get that stuff up and running. I looked in the vault. We don't have Codename Eagle. But that's it for emails, guys. Is there one that stands out for you guys?
I really liked hearing from Bob Iger.
I think the very first thing that came up was, I believe, was from Josh. He was asking the right
Overwatch
question
one?
about Overwatch.
Overwatch? I agree.
I think that's something more people, when things get a lot of hype, it's smart to take a step back and ask the question. Not like to hate. He wasn't hating.
Yeah?
He was just saying, like, you know, is this have the legs to stick around for a long time? And I'd like that question.
All right. I like the Paul that wrote in talking about kind of giving some healthy feedback to developers on cover story trips, stuff like that. But I think I might be with Miller, that Josh.
I'm going with this guy.
Josh. Go Josh.
Josh.
There we go. Josh Osborne, who snuck in early, really made an impression with that Overwatch question. So congratulations. We're going to send you out something nice. And that's it. Unless you're interested in video game animation and the intersection of games and Hollywood and all that fun stuff. So for an inside look at Disney and also just these animators' thoughts on games like The Last of Us even, there's a lot to cover, even though it's in the framework of the Angry Birds movie, which you may or may not be super excited about. But please stay tuned for that. Fergal and Clay, welcome to the Game Informer Show.
Hey, thanks, Ben.
Hey, thanks, Ben.
This is a strange one for the Game Informer Show, but I'm really excited to talk to you guys. You guys are the directors of the Angry Birds movie, and when's that coming out again?
May this year.
Okay.
Coming out May 20th in the U.S. Of this year.
Awesome. So, Fergal, your background, you're a storyboard artist for movies like Iron Giant, and then Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, and Spider-Man 2. And a bunch of other things thrown in there as well. What's it like to jump back and forth between live action and animated films like that?
I guess for me, there's really no difference, especially these days. It's all converging into one sort of, you can rob techniques from all the different types of filmmaking and storytelling.
Now, Clay, you have a deeper connection to Game Informer than you're aware of, because the studio that I'm recording this in right now, when I was building it out and like painting the walls and putting like the sound dampening in and the lights, everything like that, I did nothing but just binge your entire podcast, the old animation podcast it's called. It is so good. So thank you so much for the hard work putting that thing out years ago.
Hey, thanks, man. Yeah, I every week I get someone asking me, hey, when's the podcast coming back? And I'm like, I'm making a movie, so not anytime soon. But I appreciate it. Yeah, I've heard from a lot of animators and students that, said that got them through animation school. Basically, as they're working, they would just listen to the podcast and listen to the interviews that I conducted. And I'm always happy to hear that, the work I did years ago is still, helping people get their careers going. So it's good to hear. So
and
thanks.
It's pretty timeless stuff, too. Like, you can still go back and listen to it. And, like, I just re-listened to the Glenn Keane interview, and it was a little bit strange how he was talking about how he's directing Rapunzel and stuff like that. So some things change, but it's still, there's so much good stuff in there. And there is an amazing historical artifact in that for animation geeks. And by the way, like, I enjoy animated movies, but I consider that podcast turning me into like a full-blown animation geek. It does a really good job of infecting you with that. But there's this one episode with Milt Kahl, who's an old Disney animator, legendary Disney animator, and it's just him in a classroom just speaking about, was it The Rescuers?
Yeah.
And then you can hear like young Brad Bird asking a ton of questions in there, and it is just an amazing, super low-key relic, and it's an amazing piece of audio. People, if you have the slightest interest in animation, you should check it out.
You can totally pick up Brad Bird in that interview. John Musker's in there. I think Henry Selick may be in there. It's kind of wild, that class that Milt visited. It was like in 76 or something like that.
Yeah, and he was remarkably transparent, too, just talking about, Disney's, like, their best days weren't exactly in the 70s. He's like, those old pictures were much better. This new stuff, Like, I don't know if he knew he was being recorded or what was going on, but it's just awesome audio to have.
Yeah, it's really cool. Fergal's been dangling this one that he has for a while. I may end up snatching it from him. He's got a great recording with Ward Kimball, actually, when Fergal was a young man, just thrown up to Hollywood. He's never shared it with me, but maybe one day it'll come through me, through Fergal, through the podcast. Maybe it'll come back.
Yeah, when I came over here, I think I was 18 or 19, something like that, and I had the opportunity to go visit Ward at his house, and I recorded these 2 crappy cassette tapes, but they're about 3 hours. I think it was 3 hours of stuff, and he gave me a whole tour of his train collection and all his toys, and it was awesome. But like Clay is like we wanted to I wanted to give it to Clay so he could sort of maybe put it on his podcast.
So maybe the podcast will come back. We'll see.
That would be fantastic. But we should say you're more than just a podcaster, Clay. I assume you've done some other things in your career. Like you've animated at Disney since, going back to like Hercules and Pocahontas, working up through Emperor's New Groove, then the 3D revolution, working on Wreck-It Ralph, Frozen, Entangled, everything like that. So you really had a firsthand view of like Disney's full shift to 3D animation, which is an incredible perspective to have.
Absolutely. I was definitely along for the ride. Before this job, that was the only place I ever worked was at Disney, so I started there. when I was 21, and now I'm an old man. So, but yeah, I kind of rode that thing. I learned as a 2D animator and switched over to CG eventually, and definitely experienced the ups and downs of Disney. And it's great to see that they're back on top in many ways, and it's good to have been a part of that. And for me, it was my school, as my education was working at Disney. So much of how I look at films and animation is from the things that I learned from the people I worked with at Disney. And that the podcast is just an extension of that. It was really me geeking out, trying to get all the questions I wanted answered from my heroes, and I was in a place where I could do that. So yeah, I couldn't be happier that I spent all that time there. It was definitely my education.
Did you read Ed Catmull's book, Creativity Inc.? And there's one chapter in particular where he talks about walking into the halls of Disney after the whole merger, and he was put in charge with John Lasseter and whatnot. Did it seem accurate to you? I'm curious if you read that chapter.
I have not read that chapter. I skipped to the part where he's talking about me, but he didn't mention me by name.
Wait, what part was that?
Well, he talks about on Bolt when they had to redo the hamster character, and that was definitely my experience of, the character was in terms of being able to be animated correctly for what the film needed. It just wasn't quite ready, and so we kind of stopped production for a few weeks while I worked with a couple great riggers and modelers to get that character back in shape. So I was really touched that he kind of put that story in there. But it was, in terms of his perspective on business and what you need to do, is sometimes you have to, as he put it, pull the cord and stop the train, even though it's really scary. And kind of proud that I ended up in his book in a small way.
Yeah, definitely. Well, hey, since this is a video game podcast, I wanted to get your guys' take on video game animation. How much do you guys pay attention to the evolution of video game animation? Are there certain key titles that have ever stood out to you from the video game world?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even like I was saying earlier, like the drawing influences from just video game storytelling and the freedom that you have to create worlds and sort of move around inside those worlds. We've drawn on those techniques. I had such a hunger for trying to crack this storytelling thing that not only, that's why I kind of sought to work in live action. It was a very conscious choice to see if I could learn from filmmakers like Sam Raimi and just Barry Levinson, people like that I could actually draw, techniques from. And video games have really influenced, I think, our choices in this movie. And we both play video games. We both enjoy, talking about what we play, and it definitely has influenced things about the way even I think about camera and blocking a scene, and sort of the way we think about the audience's experience in an environment.
Yeah. Outside of Angry Birds, is there a specific video game that really stands out to you in terms of camera work and animation?
Right now, I'm sort of going through, the whole Assassin's Creed series. I'm about to start Black Flag, and just The Last of Us. I think Clay was like a big fan of The Last of Us as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So it's we've played so many games really, but right now I'm sort of on an Assassin's Creed kick.
Yeah, and me coming from an animation background, I always kind of prefer the stuff that's a little more pushed. You have your Grand Theft Auto kind of motion capture performance, which is cool because it does feel like a real person. But I think I swing more towards the if you go towards Street Fighter style, where it's you can really push the frames and the poses and everything. So every once in a while you get some stuff with some nice animation that's really it just feels like more of a treat. Someone actually spent the time. I remember I think it was the first Ratchet and Clank that I saw at E3 actually back in the day. And I was like, wow, these are actually, nice bounce and squash and stretch. And they're actually using a lot of animation principles that I hadn't really seen before. So it's just the evolution of video games has been pretty amazing.
Yeah. And you talk about, preferring the keyframe animation in video games compared to the mocap stuff. And I think a lot of people don't realize that with Last of Us, the faces were still all done keyframe animation.
Yeah, and it's really good. It's really, I mean, people have a real emotional reaction to that game, and you know why? It's the storytelling, but it's also just like what you're seeing in the performance that comes through those characters' expressions. It's really effective.
Yeah, definitely. So you're saying the Angry Birds movie is going to be a little bit like Last of Us? Is that what you guys are shooting for?
Yeah, zombies and
No, but with the Angry Birds movie, I think the video game world is always a little bit skeptical. We hear so many adaptations of games are in the works and so few of them come out. And recently I think there's been a crop of like a lot of video game adaptations into animated films where it's like, oh, there's a Heavenly Sword film or a Ratchet and Clank film or now a Sonic the Hedgehog movie and stuff like that. So I think there's a history of skepticism, and I'm wondering how you think the Angry Birds movie fits into that world now.
Well, it's for us, I always find that amusing. I mean, I understand the skepticism because I would be as skeptical as anybody else. But when it actually comes to building the movie and building the story, the way we approached it wasn't really any different than, we worked on lots of movies where you're creating a world and characters from scratch. And in feature animation, that's a really, really common challenge. You're creating the entire story from a very thin premise. Sometimes you don't even have a script. So you're creating characters from scratch, appealing characters and interesting characters, and then you're creating the world that those characters inhabit from scratch. So the challenge for us wasn't really all that different what we would do if, say, you were working on, a Disney feature or, a DreamWorks feature. Kung Fu Panda started from a very simple premise. So did, Wreck-It Ralph or,
anything we've ever worked on, basically.
Yeah, and you guys also, I mean, half of the starting premise, the angry part, it's a good place to start with an animation. Like I think of, like, nothing's funnier to me than Woody just being completely exasperated in Toy Story. Or, I mean, there's the classic example of, like, Daffy Duck. It's angry characters and animations are really funny. So it's a good first step at least, right?
Absolutely. And it's really funny to watch when you're not angry yourself, but to watch people get angry. Angry can be a funny emotion to watch play out. It's a great emotion to play with from a comedic standpoint, just because you have the inherent conflict of why somebody is angry and what made them angry in the first place. Yeah,
that's something we actually analyzed a lot, with characters like Woody or Daffy that you mentioned. The reason they're entertaining to watch is because you care about those characters. You are invested in what they're feeling and going through. And that was something that we really paid attention to in terms of making sure that, Red as a character, he's appealing. If he's not, then he's just an angry guy, and he becomes a scary character. And it's like, we definitely didn't do that. We put him in situations that you would say, like, yes, that's how I would love to react in the real world, even though I'm more normal than that. So it gave us a lot of freedom to really push the ideas and the moments and the things we put him through, and we allowed him to react in a way that, honestly, like, I haven't had the opportunity to, like, work on movies where we could go this far in terms of the humor and how far we could push things, and it's actually pretty freeing. So it's fun. It's fun to, like, explore this theme and idea of anger and doing it in an entertaining way.
Red does the things that we wish we could do when we're angry.
Okay, a little bit like, Larry David and Curb Your Enthusiasm type of thing.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
That's one of my favorite shows.
Big influences.
I get a lot of inspiration from Larry David.
So what has it been like to work with Rovio, the developer of the Angry Birds games, in the process?
It's been really great.
Awesome.
They've been extremely supportive in terms of the film that we've wanted to make. We have checked in with them periodically, but it's really a thing where they said, we want to make this film. They built this team with great leadership, and they've basically said, like, go do your thing. And then that's, we both worked in the industry for over 20 years apiece, and we've worked on a lot of great films, and it's just like allowing us to take what we know and invest it into this film, and they've been overjoyed with how it's come out. So
yeah,
it's been a really good relationship.
Yeah, they David Maisel, John Cohn, Catherine Winder, they're our producers, and they have this. We're all of course part of Rovio, but the Mikhail Head, who's the sort of the creative leader of Rovio in terms of the Angry Birds movie, he put together those four guys put together a great team, and sort of there was a freedom that we had to sort of just explore new avenues of comedy and really push the world and push the characters, and the freedom to sort of create relationships that don't exist in the game, to build a great story. So it's sort of like we took the very simple premise, and then we kind of went off with John Vidi's script and just made it a very it's the next stage in evolution in terms of it's evolved into its own world, its own thing.
Yeah, and basically our marching orders were to make the funniest movie we could, and we had known elements of the game with, you have these birds with eggs, we have green pigs that want these eggs, and you have a slingshot. And like, those are givens. You have to have that or it's not Angry Birds.
Uh-huh.
But outside of that, they didn't kind of force us to like, no, that's what this character does, or it has to be this kind of story. It was really giving us the freedom to like take those elements and build a world and a story around it. And honestly, I think that, we're more excited about the stuff that people don't expect from Angry Birds. Like, they expect all these things to happen, and they do, but it's stuff outside of that those are the really rewarding aspects of the film. And I think it's the stuff that makes people fall in love with these characters and this world that we're making. It's the stuff that, like, you don't expect to be in the film. It's really actually a heartwarming and hilarious movie. So it's pretty cool. They've really given us the freedom to kind of express who we are as, filmmakers and our sense of humor, and it's really played out.
We were aware when we started, like that there would be a lot of skepticism and sort of, cynicism about, taking the premise of a video game and adapting it into a story. But honestly, we're used to those kind of challenges in what we did in our previous work on animated movies and live action movies. So it was. We both challenged ourselves, each other, to sort of, always top the joke or, come up with the unexpected character turn. And that in itself is a sort of ignition process, and it helps set off all kinds of other, like, excuse the pun, explosions of ideas and that's what sort of the movie starts to take on a life of its own, when you're building it, and it sort of tells you what it needs to be, and it's been a very sort of exciting process like that, and a brisk process, for 2.5 years.
Yeah, for sure.
And in terms of video games, we don't live in a bubble. We've lived through the Super Mario Brothers movies, and there's the list goes on, and it's as film goers, it can be disappointing, and so of course we want to set out to make a movie that we would want to go see, and it actually is one of those movies. It's the kind of film that you want to go see over and over again because there's so much funny stuff happening in the background, character jokes, and just the lines of dialogue and the moments that happen. So we we set out to kind of break this video game movie curse of, like, they don't have to be bad. They can actually be really fun and engaging and exciting.
But Clay, you did work on Wreck-It Ralph in your past. I mean, that's a real success story, I think, for the video game industry.
I love that movie. Yeah, I worked my ass off on that movie. But it's not really based on an existing property except for the peripheral characters. But that was a great movie to work on.
And that must have been a tough one.
Right.
Go ahead.
Ironically, in a way, if Angry Birds, the app, had very specific story points to it, there would have almost been more of an obligation. Whereas, there was the very simple premise, the very simple conflict of birds versus the pigs. But that's it. Then you have freedom to go off and create great characters and sort of, the birds in the game are just icons, but our job was to actually make them real characters and sort of make the audience feel something for the characters. We've sort of created this new thing now, and it's pretty exciting to watch it.
Yeah, we really think people are genuinely going to be surprised with the film that we've created. It's really a fun movie.
Surprised, you mentioned it's heartwarming and it's funny, but are there other twists in there, or what do you think is the most bold aspect of this movie that people don't appreciate yet?
I think it's the heart of it is in the relationship that we've created between the triangle of Red, Chuck, and Bomb. Like those three characters, we created, I think, really unique personalities and they just, I don't know what it is, the chemistry, we've created this chemistry between them that makes them really funny to watch. And every time they're together on screen, you're laughing, so it's they're a great cinematic triumvirate in a way, comedic triumvirate, and that's really the engine of the story is watching those three guys together and how they handle the situation. The idea of pigs, taking the basic premise, the idea of pigs against birds and the pigs stealing the birds' eggs, that's just plot. That's not story. That's not what the audience is going to come to see. They're going to come to see characters that are really funny and endearing and do unexpected stuff and relate to each other in real ways, and that goes for all the stuff that they get into in the movie.
Yeah, definitely. So it's funny to think about what you're saying, and then the trailers, all that we've really seen so far, there's a lot of butt jokes, a lot of getting hit in the balls jokes, a lot of pee jokes. Is that just the necessity of trailer humor versus the actual film sense of humor?
I think it's in a way standing out and saying, like, this isn't, like, maybe what you would expect from the Angry Birds. Just saying it's kind of outside of the realm of your kind of traditional family animated film. It's a broader audience film. We're trying to say that it's for everybody, honestly. And the truth is, like, you don't need to have played the game ever or in the last 3 days or in the last 3 years. The movie stands on its own in that way. So you don't have to even understand what the premise is to go and enjoy this movie. But yeah, I promise you the movie is not 2 hours of an eagle peeing in a lake.
Bold vision indeed.
Or 2 hours of butt jokes. That's a couple of gags in a 2-hour movie. And when you see them in context, you'll see that they're actually very, very funny. It's no different than, many movies. I mean, I worked on a movie way back in 2004 or 5, Open Season, which, the character of Elliot, poops, right on screen, it got a big laugh, and it was kind of a big shock at the time for animated movies. But everybody has their take on that kind of a little visual joke.
Yeah, I should point out, I mean, you mentioned it briefly, but John Vitti, if that's how you pronounce it, an amazing writer. I mean, he wrote a lot of the early Simpsons stuff, like Cape Fear episode and the Mr. Plow episode, and maybe more importantly, he wrote a lot of Larry Sanders Show, which is a show I love.
Oh, yeah. John is hilarious.
He wrote, I think, Arrested Development. He wrote a couple of things on SNL. So
on The Office. He's been...
The Office. So it's that kind of tone that, we have in the movie. That's it's particularly clever, and it comes out in the relationship of the characters to each other.
Yeah. Are you guys involved? Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, we talk about the trailers and what we can put out. The movie in its fullness, the way it's been written, it's not just a bunch of kind of like one-off shots that are a funny gag that you can just like drop in and sell the movie on. It's more about like watching an entire sequence of these characters interacting. That's when it really comes to life and it really pays off. So it's for us, we've seen the movie hundreds of times by now, and we still laugh at it every time. But it's definitely an experience you have to see in its fullness to kind of appreciate what we're doing here in terms of these characters and establishing these guys that you're going to want to come back and see over and over again.
So can you guys talk about your relationship with the Lego sets at all? I think there were some talks about Lego Dimensions expansion pack thing associated with this film.
Yeah, man. I don't know about you, but when I grew up, my life was Star Wars and Legos. Like when I was a kid, that's all I played with. And so when we had the opportunity to go to Lego and show them our film and show them the artwork and scenes from the movie and, pitch the idea that we would like toys made, one, to even have that meeting, it was magic. And two, they said that they would do it. I can't tell you how happy I am to know that there's going to be Legos of a movie I've worked on.
Is it also being turned into a Lego Dimensions part of the game then as well?
In terms of, the Lego, no, not that we know of.
Okay. So how much have you guys learned about the animation industry from this process? Does the step up of a directorial debut just completely change your perspective on the industry?
I was at Disney for my whole career, like I said, and so for me, stepping outside of that and working with Sony Pictures ImageWorks, they created the animation and all the imagery of the film. It just shows me that like there's a lot of talent out there, not just at one big studio, but it's like there's immense talent like lurking out there in the world just waiting to make films. So just knowing that like you could go out and work many places. That was really exciting and kind of.
And actually, on Clay's point, we have our sort of our base studio in Sherman Oaks, but we hired artists, storyboard artists, visual development artists, designers. We had the freedom to sort of look around the world, and we worked with designers in France,
Brazil,
in South America, Vietnam. I mean, we this was a global studio in a way, and that was sort of an interesting sort of part of the process for us.
Yeah,
I think in many ways, like this experience might bias us in kind of almost a too positive way, because it was a very kind of straightforward process. We were contacted. There was a movie that was going to be made with a certain budget and a script, and it was going to come out on this date, and we got on it, and we made it. It's been 2.5 years, and normally on any movie I've ever been on, there's a moment where the movie kind of implodes, and the story breaks apart, and you have to stop, and you have to fix it, and we didn't really experience that in this film. It was more about a process of iteration and having the opportunity, the experience to just go over scenes over and over to make them as funny as possible. So we spent most of our time and energy not kind of restructuring or rebuilding a film. It was more about taking what we had and making it as good as possible, which is, honestly, it's a unique experience in my experience of making movies.
Right. It's as Brad Bird says, it's sort of using every part of the buffalo. I mean, one of the things that I learned from him, is that, at some of the bigger studios, you'll be 3/4 away through the project and they'll abandon the entire thing because of a seemingly insurmountable problem, or because, a story problem or something like that. And there is another way to make a movie, and that's, that is, knowing, starting off with a simple story and then building, really great characters off that, and then just working the material in an iterative way.
You guys are so close to the finish line. Congratulations on wrapping up the Angry Birds movie. I think people are looking forward to it.
Hey, thanks
Thank
a lot.
you, Ben.
Yeah, please go and enjoy it, because we've poured our heart into this for the last 2.5 years.
Absolutely.
All right.
You're gonna have a great time.
Thanks for watching or listening to this episode of the Game Informer Show. Be sure to tune in next week, and we'll have a new episode waiting for you. Bye.